Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and the co-host of the business news podcast, Fear and Greed. And as always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner, founder of Sugar Mama TV, financial literacy platform that you find pretty much everywhere. And I say that every time, but you really are everywhere. You're on YouTube and you've got podcasts, you've got books, you've got Instagram and TikTok and everywhere, really.
Everywhere. And my Budget Cashflow Academy has launched, so people can actually do an online course, self-paced with me, to learn how to master their budget.
And that's via your website, isn't it?
That's correct.
Oh, there we go. So now you're also on your website. So you're on the internet, which was probably kind of the place where we probably should have started. We have something a little bit different today, Canna.
I'd say a little bit special.
Yes, a little bit special. But I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit apprehensive about this one because we have a special guest joining us in the studio who is, in fact, your own money mentor. Peter,
that's correct.
Peter Thornhill. And now Peter's been working in financial services for something like 50 years. So I was trying to be polite and kind of reduce it slightly, but no, 50 years. Now, your business and your book is called Motivated Money. You consult to a bunch of financial institutions, and your approach to building and maintaining wealth has pretty much become legendary. The reason, though, that I am so apprehensive about this is that, Peter, when Canna told me that you were going to be joining us in the studio, she said, Michael, he's going to eat you alive. And then, Canna, you refused to tell me why. You wouldn't even give me a hint as to what I was in for. So you understand then why I am nervous. Peter Thornhill, welcome to How Do They Afford That?
Thank you for inviting me in, Canna.
Okay, the two of you together is very ominous. And the way you share these kind of little glances across going, let's get him. Oh, I still don't know what I'm in for here. But look, we actually need to start before we get into it. Canna, we just need to make it clear that as you're listening, anything that we talk about is always general in nature. It is never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
Absolutely. Everything that you hear is never investment advice, product advice, or strategic advice. So please bear that in mind and always do your own research and reach out to a financial planner and ask them for personal advice should you wish.
All right. Let's get into it. You know, actually, before we get started on the substance of today, I'm going to have to ask you, Peter, because we always start with a bit of a savings hack, a savings tip, just a little kind of tidbit of advice that might help people save a little bit of money. And we if we ever have a special guest in the studio, we spring it on them. Do you by any chance have a savings tip that you might use in your own life to save a bit of money?
Well, I guess one is we became members of the Palace Cinemas, so we get cheap tickets. I'm into frequent flyer points and managed to score 2 business class return flights from Morocco using frequent flyer points. So, yeah.
The flights, we had a guest a few weeks ago, Steve Huey from iflyflat.com, who would be very, very proud to hear that, the fact that you are using your points so wisely to get those upgrades and to make those trips, especially a longer trip like that to Morocco, just that little bit more, what am I saying, a little bit more comfortable? A lot more comfortable.
Out of interest, how much did you save from those frequent flyer points? That would have been like maybe $30,000 in getting those free business class flights?
The business class flights return we paid $4,000 for and 2 million frequent flyer points.
How much would they have cost you, though, to pay for those seats outright?
$20,000.
Wow.
At least, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Business class.
Yeah.
It's some good. That's a good $20,000 is a good saving hack there. Frequent flyer points, they do help.
And the one that you started with as well, Peter, about the
Movies,
cinema subscription, that's a really good one because it's not just the kind of the boutique and the independent cinemas, it's also the bigger chains, like you get your Cinebuzz memberships as well, which are very affordable. They might even be free to join up, and you can get those discount tickets and you can get kind of access to early deals and things, which can make going to the movies, which especially if you're taking a family, if you're taking the kids, it is so expensive.
So expensive. painfully expensive.
And so suddenly being able to get even a small discount, and the discounts aren't actually small, they can be fairly significant, makes a really big difference and actually makes it an affordable kind of trip.
And can I say, being a shareholder, I'm delighted. We own shares in EVT, so we get cheap tickets at event cinemas.
Now, that is a good saving hack. I didn't know about this.
This is, look, we're discovering all kinds of, we haven't even gotten into the subject that we want to talk about. And we've already covered 1, 2, 3 different kind of savings hacks.
I told you this was going to be a special episode.
And so now I'm no longer frightened. There's still this little kind of undercurrent of fear in the studio, and it's all coming from me. Look, I think let's kind of start with, if we push the kind of fear to one side, I think, Peter, Canna says that you are her financial mentor. What is your background? Kind of, and I mentioned the fact that your approach to investing and to money has become almost legendary. What is your background? Kind of where did you learn this, and how have you been putting it into practice?
I guess it all starts with the family at home. That is probably the biggest influence on one's future life. Failed my last year at high school. My dad got me a job as a sewing machine mechanic in a factory that embroidered sheets and pillowcases. I decided I could cross that off my bucket list and answered an ad and got a job as a clerk with National Mutual in Melbourne, the insurance company. And then I met this gorgeous lady and decided I'd better change jobs because wasn't getting paid a great deal. So I applied for a job with a General Motors dealership in Melbourne. They were selling new cars. I was a clerk again, doing the financing on the sales, but my income went from about $1,100 to $2,200 a year. Whoa. So we saved up for an overseas holiday of 18 months, 6 months in US, 6 months in England, 6 months in Europe, and then come home. But we didn't come home for 18 years.
Oh, wow.
Which was the best thing that ever happened to us. And I've encouraged all my sons to go and live abroad for some time just to get out of the mindset that this country destroys people with, of this love affair with property. And from there, got to England, worked for National Mutual for a little while as a clerk, then answered an ad and went to work as a clerk for an investment bank in the City of London. And that was the last time I ever applied for a job. Every other job came looking for me.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing position to be in.
Yeah. So working for the bank, got headhunted by another company, a funds management company. They asked Frida and I to move to the Midlands, open an office in Birmingham, and had the Lincolnshire coast to the North Wales coast was my sales patch. Apparently I did really well because they asked me to come back and take over London and the southeast of England as my sales patch. And in the process of doing that, I got headhunted on the way back to London by S.G. Warburg, who wanted to bring me back to Australia because they were getting involved with Potter Partners, the stockbroking firm. So I ended up coming back to Australia, worked there for a while, and then a funds management company, Perpetual Trustees, asked me to move to Sydney. I've been everywhere, man. God.
You certainly have. That is quite remarkable. And there are a few things in there that I thought were really quite fascinating. And there's one in particular that I wrote down, that love affair with property that you say is, we're kind of born into that in Australia, isn't it?
It is. I call it a genetic defect.
Wow. Why? And why? I know I'm jumping way ahead here.
No, that's
because
okay.
I want to get to this, but why? What is so wrong with And this is, I can see Canna's already go, oh, here we go. Why? What is so bad about the desire to own property in Australia?
Okay, let me tell you where it comes from as well. The Register of Pecuniary Interests for the Federal Parliament I got hold of. They must by law declare their financial interests. And I discovered that the bulk of the Federal Parliament of Australia are up to their eyeballs in negatively geared property. Very few of them own shares. And as I say, This is the contempt with which the leaders of this country treat the backbone of the nation, Australian businesses. Now, the consequences of this are that the bulk of the productive capital of this country is locked up in worthless residential property. The Australian companies, because people don't like shares because they're risky, BHP, the big Australian, it's more than 70% owned by overseas shareholders. Rio, over 60% owned by overseas shareholders. How many companies do you want me to go through? The end result of this is that I think the figures for 2022, $40 billion in dividends flow out of this country in 1 year.
Wow. That is hugely significant. Okay, so there's a fairly significant mindset adjustment required then, isn't it? Because really you are right that from a very young age we are set on the Australian dream of owning your own property when maybe we should be looking elsewhere. We should be looking at if we're not looking at just essentially having a place in which to live, and if we're actually looking at it as part of a wealth creation and accumulation strategy, then we should be looking at, as you described, the backbone of Australia, which is Australian business.
Yeah, we should have somewhere to live. And if you go to a civilised country like Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Germany, France, England, long-term residential leaseholds, and I stress the word leasehold because all you have in Australia are holiday lets, 12 months and 60 days notice to quit. My 3 sons have been shuffled out of their rental time and time again. One of them with a 3-month-old baby, given 60 days notice to quit. So in Europe, you have long-term residential leaseholds, 90 years. You live there until you want to move, and then you can sell the lease to someone else. But you do not buy the physical property. You don't have to.
So this is then why there is this obsession with buying property in Australia, because the alternative just isn't.
No. When I'm Prime Minister, all the development companies, Meriton, Stockland, Mirvac, Lendlease, etc., are going to have to build apartments, and they're going to have to own those apartments and provide long-term residential leases to Australia, to Australians. And if they decide to sell the properties for a profit, then they are going to pay a huge tax impost that I will have initiated.
See, this is where the ominous bit kind of comes in. This is where that threatening kind of undercurrent came. It wasn't from me. It's what you're threatening to do when you become Prime Minister.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So look, let's move away just briefly then from property, and I understand then why you are referring to it as a defect. I think you referred to it previously, but let's move towards Australian shares, because you mentioned it before. But if we're looking today about kind of what your wealth creation strategy is and what has worked for you over a long period of time and what you've been teaching others to do, where do you start? And as part of that, I suppose, where does kind of mindset and attitude come into it when you have someone who's just starting out and who perhaps listening to this podcast for the first time going, I thought the only way to make money in Australia was to buy residential property, and they've heard this and they've heard your contempt for that kind of approach coming through, going, all right, then what's the alternative? What do I do? Where do I start?
Okay, it's very simple, really. Do what I did. I had a paper round in the morning before school, and I then graduated, and the local chemist shop employed me, and I would cycle down to the Sigma depot to pick up all the drugs. I would bring them back. He would then parcel up all the prescriptions, and I would then cycle all over the suburb delivering these prescriptions. And I got paid 10 bob a week. Yes! And I saved money. And I progressed from there slowly with job after job after job, but I always saved money.
I'm seeing now kind of where Canna has kind of drawn some of the inspiration then for, say, the $1,000 project.
Yes.
Because it feels like this is the beginning of that kind of attitude of earn the money, save the money, take on extra jobs if you can, side hustles, anything that you can to build up a little bit of extra cash. Okay, assuming that you have now done that, I've saved a bit, what do I do with it?
You invest it.
That sounds very easy. But where do you start? How do you, and I suppose this is probably where perhaps my kind of block on this comes in is finding that initial point of entry. Kind of where do you begin?
Well, my life was different, but that's like more than 50 years ago. But now what I would suggest, and with our 3 sons, what I did, I got them into monthly savings plans, into some of the unit trusts back then. They all had part-time jobs, and I took some of the money off them and put it in and got them to save. We continued that, and at Christmas and birthdays, I'd maybe double the little contribution.
Yep.
We reinvested all the dividends as well. So it was sort of piling up. The eldest son continued, he started work, continued saving, and then came along one day and said, "Oh, Dad, this was the 3rd time that he and his wife had been flicked out of the rental property, and they had a 3-month-old baby." He said, "Dad," he said, "I'm going to buy a house." I said, "Okay, no problem." And what we did was we crystallised all that he had saved from his teenage years, and so he had a substantial deposit. They bought a modest house that they could afford, and with the substantial deposit, he had the ability to be able to draw down a line of credit, so he bought back. And this is where we started to get serious with the investing in shares. The dividends were used as additional capital repayments of his home loan.
All right.
On top of his mortgage repayments,
Yep.
which he was paying weekly, rounded up.
I'm seeing again some tips and things that I've heard come out of Canna's own mouth in this studio that are sounding very familiar to this, about this idea of kind of rounding up and making
Debt
sure.
recycling.
Absolutely.
And with the recycling, so with the dividends going in and his home loan going down, lift the line of credit, buy more shares, which gave you a compounding effect doubled, because the dividends themselves were growing organically, and because you were reinvesting the dividends, you were buying more shares, which were organically growing there. So there was a doubling of the compounding. And you then bought more shares, which paid more dividends, which enabled you. So the wipeout of your mortgage as the dividends grew got wilder. So he and his wife paid off their first home in 10 years.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
Yes.
That is amazing.
No.
It
It
is
is-
seriously
dead simple.
inspiring. It was inspiring.
I mean, it sounds simple when you say it like this, but that is quite inspiring. I think you're right.
So my son is in his 40s. He now owns his home, and he borrows against that to buy shares which pay dividends.
Okay. Canna's laughing at me. Just
No, I'm not. 'Cause I never knew this. I have known Peter for 18 years, and I never knew this about Peter's son. And I know so much about Peter. So this is just so simple. But and Peter has this principle, which is, borrow less than you can afford, spend less than you earn, invest, continue on investing, use those dividends to pay down debt or to reinvest and keep your eye on the prize, which is the growing passive income streams that you don't get from residential property in Australia. Yeah, I'm like,
Okay.
even I'm like lost for words.
Okay. Is it then ever too late to implement a strategy like this?
No. And the best part is that I didn't start that until we got back to Australia.
Right.
And at that stage, I was 51.
Okay.
And I started the boys in their teens to get them going. So they've benefited from that, but also the discipline. And oddly enough, my 3 sons all own new cars, and I drive a 2005 Toyota Corolla. But they are in an ideal position in terms of their finances and the property, shares, balance, etc. So the 3 boys are ahead of me.
Sorry, did you say you started investing in your particular investment philosophy at age 51?
51.
Didn't know that either. That is, it gives us even more weight of the importance because can I tell Michael, because Michael doesn't really know too much about you because I kind of wanted to just watch this, like just Michael fall to 1,000 pieces. Guess how much Peter's investment portfolio is worth today?
Oh, I have no idea, and I wouldn't even know where to start. Go on.
$10 million? He started at 51. So for everyone out there thinking it's too late, I've missed the boat, shut up and start saving and start investing.
And there's nothing miraculous about any of this. My career, I've never been the managing director of any companies or anything like that. I started off mainly clerical, but then I got into sales management roles with fund management companies in England and Australia. And I was obviously pretty good and I got paid, very well, got nice bonuses and put everything to work. You will prosper despite your education, not as a result of it.
Wow. Okay. Canna, you're right. And you've just been sitting there waiting for that opportunity to kind of bring that up because there's so much in this. The fact that you didn't start this strategy until you were 51.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've had so much success, but then that you have passed that down to your kids. And not just to your own children, but you pass it on to many other people as well through your book, through Motivated Money, and you've taught Canna, and Canna has passed that on without a huge amount of success to me at this point. But this is pretty inspiring.
I needed to get someone in front of you that would make an impact. I have been chewing Michael's ear off for a year, and has he done anything with what I've suggested? No. Are you going to now that you've heard from Peter?
Yes. Yes, I am. Because, again, I don't know whether this is a good thing, but the fact that you have said that it was a $10 million investment portfolio that you have built up since you started this strategy in your 50s, which basically shows that time is still hopefully on my side, that I've got a few years left ahead of me, that it's not too late.
But that's actually not the cool part, the $10 million.
Oh, it sounds pretty cool to me.
No, the cool part is the complete and absolute freedom. Sorry, I'm speaking on your behalf, Peter. I hope you don't mind. I just get a little bit frustrated and passionate about this, but it's actually the freedom, the independence, the luxury that Peter has every single day that he opens his eyes to spend his day as he wishes, because he has a $10 million portfolio, and actually is irrelevant what it's really worth, that pays him over $400,000 a year in dividends that are tax effective, but more importantly, growing consistently every single year and maintaining pace with the rising cost of living, if not exceeding it. And some of those dividends obviously come with those franking credits, which if you are retired, drawing an allocated pension, can quite often be refunded to you in full sometimes.
Okay, we are running way over time with this, but we have a lot more that we still need to cover. And so we're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about shares in more detail and about industrial shares, because doing a little bit of research, I've noticed that there is a bit of a bias towards that particular sector. I'd love to know why and what it is that kind of draws you towards it. So we'll come back in a moment. All right, Canna, we're joined today in the studio by Peter Thornhill, who is your own money mentor. He is the author of Motivated Money, and he has taught you a lot. He's taught a lot of people, and he's taught me a few things already today, just in the studio, about your approach to money, Peter, which I'm finding fascinating. If we can just focus a little bit on the strategy that you use when you are buying shares and what you are looking for. And as I mentioned before the break, that you, from the research that I've done, I've seen that you do have a bit of a focus on industrials. What is it that draws you to them?
Digging stuff out of the ground is not very productive.
Okay.
The value add comes from technological, manufacturing, and intellectual inputs that convert all the stuff we dig out of the ground or grow and convert it into a bionic ear. The technological inputs are the value add. The mere digging of the stuff out of the ground it's fine, but to have a country relying on digging stuff out of the ground and then exporting all that material, what was it? We were selling iron ore at one stage for about $280 a tonne.
Mm.
Yeah. We used to make cars in Australia. I don't know whether you remember, Ford, General Motors, etc. How many cars do we make in Australia?
None.
None.
Now.
Okay. We export the iron ore to Asian countries and overseas countries. We then re-import the $280,000 iron ore in the form of a motor car at $20,000 a tonne. Clever country? I don't think so.
Okay, when you put it like that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it?
No.
Well, okay. How then do you figure out, I understand the broad principle behind that. When you're looking at that sector, though, how do you decide which companies that you actually like? When you're really looking at the specifics, how do you decide which ones to buy?
I don't. I can't because I'm not that smart.
Well, okay, I like where you're going with this because I'm feeling an affinity in this space.
Yeah.
How do you do it then?
How do I do it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a great fan, as a byproduct of my time in England, of listed investment companies. Dare I do City of London?
Absolutely.
Okay. Years in England, working in the finance industry, my favourite listed investment company, the managed funds and ETFs are trust structures. A listed investment company is a company like Woolworths, Coles, Commonwealth Bank. The difference is that a listed investment company, the sole assets of that company are shares in other companies. So it's a managed fund, effectively, but it's a listed company on the stock exchange instead of a trust. And I like that structure because a trust structure requires, by law, that any profits or dividends they receive are distributed to shareholders. Otherwise, there's double taxation. So they must pay out everything they receive every year, which creates very erratic and non-tax effective. One managed fund, I won't name the fund, my quarterly dividends coming in were $2,000, $1,800, $2,100, $11,000 for a quarterly dividend because the fund manager traded lots of capital gains, had to pay it out. 2 years later, I get a dividend of $17,000. One single dividend, $17,000, because the fund had a lot of turnover and they had to distribute the capital gains. That's why I'll never touch an ETF or a managed fund. I want a listed investment company. If the company makes a profit, they can hold that and reinvest it on my behalf. They don't have to pay it out. So the LICs are my favourite, and I leave to them to do the investing on my behalf.
Well, how do you pick which one? Because
Easy.
there are a number of listed investment
Easy.
companies. How do you choose?
Whitefield. It's 100% industrials.
So I'm just silent for a moment while I'm writing this down, yes?
I think the whole, every single listener right now is quickly fumbling for a pen and paper.
And seeking perfection is the path to madness. So I use other listed investment companies like Argo, Brickworks, Soul Pattinson's, etc. Now, they will probably have the major mining stocks as part of their portfolio.
Yeah.
But considering them plus Whitefield, if you look at the pie chart of all the shareholdings within the listed investment companies, the pie chart has a little slice that's resources. And you know what? I don't care less because the companies, Rio, BHP, pay dividends.
This is probably a good point at which to say that you need to do some research as well. If you are considering some of these listed investment companies that Peter's mentioned, that you should do some research and make sure that it's suited for you and get some professional advice and just go through all of those things, because this is for financial education purposes only, and it is really, you need to make sure that the solution that you go for is one that is
right for you, and you understand the risks before you make any decisions.
Can I just add, one of the tragedies in this country is the love affair with balanced portfolios.
right.
And people are extolling the virtues because it reduces risk. They equate volatility with risk. Volatility has nothing to do with risk. Volatility is a function of the liquidity of shares, right?
Yep.
So people have a change of mind. The mood changes, everybody sells. The mood changes, everybody buys. So the prices are going everywhere. But it's that liquidity that is not the risk.
How do you get started? Is it just as easy as kind of buying or investing in one listed investment company and then just adding to it when you can afford to invest more?
Yes.
Well, that's easy. That's a lot easier than I was expecting.
The reason I like diversification and owning more than one is that instead of only being paid twice a year, well, let's go back to my experience in the UK. When I came back to Australia, I left my super fund in England. It has 4 listed investment companies in it. Every one of them pays 4 dividends a year. I receive 16 dividend checks. I draw 12 monthly pension payments. I like the diversity because I'm getting this constant flow of cash coming in.
Yeah.
If I only own one listed investment company, my cash flow is going to be 2 a year. Duh.
That is very, very simple. That makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Also, Peter, can you just explain to the listeners and also to Michael, superannuation is essentially your investment portfolio as well. So for people thinking, well, like, love to be invested, but I can't afford to, right in our laps right now is the ability to start applying all this stuff through your superannuation.
Yep. Our super fund, I fancied my skill, and working for fund managers, they would often give me tips on stocks. So our super fund ended up with 54 holdings. I have, since I quit the industry, because I could no longer, working in the industry, stand in front of an audience and tell them to use a balanced portfolio, because you add cash, you add property to shares, and no one in the industry ever tells the client that adding cash and property, instead of being there, the cash and the property drag you down to there. The opportunity cost over your lifetime, no one ever tells you. Adding lead to the saddlebag.
Okay, it probably leads into a question I'm very curious then about, because if you have been educating people for a long time and you've been having a lot of conversations and you have done this for yourself as well, what are the biggest money mistakes that people are making in this country? Is it the one that we started on today, which is the obsession with property?
Well, that's the primary one. But secondary is the industry that I worked in, and the reason I left it in 2000. Because in all conscience, I could no longer stand in front of an audience and tell them to invest in a balanced fund. Because the cost to them over their lifetime of having cash and property in that portfolio is going to be hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that they've missed out on.
The opportunity cost is huge.
The opportunity cost is monumental, but no one in the industry, financial planners or fund managers, ever tell the client.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this, and this is the kind of podcast that you need to go back and listen to a second time to make sure that you get everything out of it. If people want more information, what do you recommend? I'm assuming it would be pick up a copy of your book, Motivated Money.
Well, that's hopefully a good first step, but seek financial advice. There are some good financial planners out there. I know of 4 that I love to bits. They have known me for a very long time, and I'm very comfortable that they have absorbed my philosophy.
I still find it fascinating, the point that we started, that property in Australia is almost a disease, that we are taught from a very young age that you need to buy property, and that that is the key to wealth. accumulation? Because you see a lot of stories in the media as well about people that have accumulated kind of, I had 18 properties by the time I was 30 years old. What kind of damage is that doing?
Well, desperate. What could they have done with 13? Let's say they just kept one, sold the other 12 and invested that in shares.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Does their rent go up every year? Every year? And it costs them nothing to own the property, doesn't it?
One thing that's just occurred to me, a quick one as well, is you mentioned volatility before. What's your advice to people who are new to this and who are just wary of all the talk about volatility? Because it is something that grabs a lot of headlines. Whenever there are these dips and these spikes, how do newcomers to investing in shares hold their nerve?
Toughen up, princess. Just get used to it.
Yeah.
And it can work to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some wonderful opportunities because during the GFC, Commonwealth Bank shares got absolutely hammered. They were around $60 and they ended up at around $26. And if you're telling me that Commonwealth Bank lost more than half its business, I'd say you're an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
However, people are selling because they are nervous and ignorant. But I was absolutely delighted. And Commonwealth Bank was so kind to me because they came back to me as an existing shareholder and said, we're issuing new shares to existing shareholders as a share purchase plan. You pay no brokerage, you get a small discount, and you get to buy this parcel, which is available only to existing shareholders, at $26 a share. Guess what? And a whole raft of companies did that.
Wow.
West Farmers and so on. And I've actually got the figures. Those $26 shares that I bought, the dividends on that parcel alone has paid off what I paid for the shares 3 times over. I've already had 3 times my money back.
Oh, wow.
Commonwealth Bank could go broke and I could never lose money. West Farmers, exactly the same. I've got a whole raft of these.
Look, this is one of those episodes that even I will have to go back and listen to a couple of times because this has been so interesting and so inspiring as well. And we do need to repeat that message that this will not necessarily be suited to everybody, and you should get professional advice and do your own research as well. But this is a starting point, and it is all about education and benefiting from the experience of somebody who's been doing it and has managed to accumulate a very, very impressive investment portfolio starting in your 50s. I find that very inspiring.
Easy, really?
Well, now you've made it sound easy. You've made it sound a lot easier than I thought it was coming in here today. And let's see how it goes. Canna,
we're going to have a little chat, Michael and I, after. We're going to have a heart-to-heart about Michael maybe applying all of these very important principles and strategies and ideas to improve his own financial well-being.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity.
That was Peter Thornhill, the author of Motivated Money and Canna's own money mentor. Now, Canna, if people want to see kind of how you have taken on board some of Peter's wisdom over the years and want to kind of see how you're using that, where do people get in touch with you?
Well, the best place to reach out to me is on Instagram at SugarMamaTV, and shoot me through a DM and I'll come back to you as quickly as I possibly can.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. Thank you very much for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember, please, to hit follow on the podcast and please leave us a review as well. Next week, we are talking about what to do with money when a relationship ends. It is something that a lot of people obviously have to deal with, and it can get a little bit tricky. So we're talking about some strategies on how to deal with that. It should be a really interesting conversation. Don't miss it.